When I was 15, I presented as an Omega, but not the kind of Omega people talk about. I have no pheromones, no heat cycles, no signs that would ever give me away. The only thing my body still has is the ability to reproduce. A defective Omega. I realized very early on that I didn't belong anywhere in this world. To alphas, I had no value. To other Omegas, I wasn't one of them. So to avoid unnecessary trouble, I chose the simplest way out. I told everyone I was just a beta. And I lived like that. A normal beta. No one noticed me. No one needed me. Until he appeared. The day Griffin Hart, a top alpha, walked into the company, everything seemed to slow down. The sunlight behind him spilled across his figure, making him look like he was glowing, so bright that I couldn't look away. It wasn't pheromones, I can't feel those, but something still pulled me toward him, something I couldn't explain. In that moment, my dull gray world lit up. I started paying attention to him more and more. At first, it was just quick glances, but slowly, I began to remember every little detail. The way he slightly lowered his head when listening to others, the way he patiently explained things, the way he quietly handed me a tissue when he noticed I'd gotten caught in the rain, or simply asked if I was okay. Those small gestures made me start to wonder, could I be someone special to him? But I quickly realized he treated everyone that way. Not just me. There was nothing special about it. I was just imagining things. And yet, realizing that didn't make me stop. If anything, it made me sink deeper. I started looking for opportunities to be near him, even if it was just for a few seconds. I took on extra tasks just to have a reason to approach him, stood in places he might pass by, tried to memorize the sound of his voice whenever he spoke nearby. Slowly, my phone filled with things related to him. Photos taken from afar, short videos where he happened to appear, recordings of his voice that I replayed every night. Things he had used and left behind, or casually discarded, I kept. Not stealing, just things no one else wanted. But to me, they became treasures. I stored them carefully, like they were the only proof that I had ever existed in the same world as him. I know this isn't normal. I know if he ever found out, he would probably think I'm strange, maybe even unsettling. So in front of him, I keep my distance, avoid his gaze, pretend I don't care. But the more I try to deny it, the less I can escape. Little by little, I fall deeper into this one-sided love, until even I can no longer see where the line should be. That night, the company party was louder than usual, filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and conversations overlapping into a constant hum. But none of it really reached me as I stood quietly at the edge of the room, just watching him from afar like I always did, memorizing the way he moved, the way he smiled politely at others, the way he carried himself with that effortless confidence that made it impossible to look away. And then someone suggested a game, truth or dare, and the atmosphere shifted instantly, people cheering, teasing, pushing each other forward until somehow he was the one being challenged. And when they told him to choose dare, the entire room erupted, eager to see what would happen next, and the challenge came quickly. Confess to someone here. Simple, harmless, just a joke, just a game. And yet my fingers tightened around the glass in my hand without me realizing. My heartbeat starting to pound louder with each passing second as I watched him scan the room, not daring to hope and yet unable to stop myself from wishing. Even if it was just pretend, even if it meant nothing, just once, just one time. And then he started walking straight toward me, and everything inside me froze, my thoughts blank, my breath caught somewhere between my chest and my throat as he stopped right in front of me, close enough that I could hear him breathe, close enough that the world outside of that small space seemed to disappear entirely. And then he reached out, gently, taking my hand, his touch warm and steady, and looked directly into my eyes, and said, "Evan Sinclair, I like you. Would you be my boyfriend?" And for a moment, I couldn't think, couldn't move, couldn't even understand what was happening. Because this was everything I had imagined in the quiet corners of my mind, everything I had replayed in dreams I never allowed myself to believe in. And yet it was happening, right there, right in front of me, and my heart felt like it was about to burst, like it couldn't contain the overwhelming rush of something I had never been meant to have. And then he gave a small, almost playful wink, just subtle enough that no one else seemed to notice, and let go of my hand before turning away. The room instantly filling back with noise, laughter, applause, people calling it a perfect move, a safe choice, just a harmless performance for the game. And I stood there, still frozen, still holding on to the echo of his touch, finally understanding what that wink meant, understanding that to him. It was nothing more than a convenient answer, an easy option, because I was just the only single beta left, the safest choice in the room, and maybe he thought he had picked the least complicated option, but he didn't know. He didn't know that every word he had just said, every second of that moment, had already been recorded on my phone out of habit, and that from that night on, those words would play over and over again in the quiet of my room, becoming the one thing I could never let go of, even knowing it was never real. After that night, everything inside me began to spiral out of control. That fake confession didn't fade away. Instead, it replayed over and over in my mind like a recording I couldn't turn off, slipping into every thought, every quiet moment, every second between being awake and asleep, and the dreams started coming too, vague and hard to put into words, showing up night after night until I would wake up with my heart racing and a strange mix of warmth and unease lingering in my chest. And that was when fear set in, a quiet, growing fear that if this continued, I would lose control of myself, that if he looked at me just a little longer, he might see straight through me and uncover everything I had been trying so hard to hide. So in real life, I began to avoid him, at first without realizing it, but then more deliberately, more carefully, I asked coworkers to pass documents for me instead of bringing them myself. I chose the farthest seat in the meeting room, the one tucked away where his eyes were least likely to reach, and whenever I had to speak to him, I kept my gaze slightly off to the side, never meeting his eyes directly. I came up with as many small excuses as I could just to leave early, just to not be near him longer than necessary. I kept telling myself I had to stop, that I had to crush this hopeless feeling before it went any further. I wanted out. I wanted to go back to the quiet life I had before, where he was just someone I didn't have to think about. But none of it worked, because all it took was one careless moment, one brief glance when I accidentally looked up and found his eyes already on me, and my heart would still react on its own, still tighten with a small, undeniable sense of happiness that slipped through all my defenses, as if everything I had tried to suppress meant nothing at all, except something about. The way he was looking at me now felt different, not the same as before. Things started to show faster than I expected. "Hey, are you okay? You've been acting kind of weird lately," a coworker asked while standing next to me at the coffee machine. I paused for a second, then shook my head. "I'm fine. Just a little tired," I said, but she kept looking at me like she didn't believe it. By noon, another colleague stopped by my desk and lowered their voice. "You and the boss, something going on?" My fingers tightened around my pen. "No," I answered too quickly, faster than normal, so fast it even sounded fake to my own ears. Then that afternoon, the coworker I was closest to pulled me into a quiet corner of the hallway. "Hey, the boss asked me about you." My heart skipped. "About what?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "He asked if you've been okay lately, said you seem different." She studied my face. "Are you sure nothing's going on?" I stayed silent for a few seconds, then forced a small smile. "It's really nothing," I said, but in my head there was only one thought repeating. "This is bad. I've gone too far." And before I could even prepare myself, an internal message popped up on my screen. "Evan, come to my office." My hands went cold instantly. I stood outside his door for a few seconds, took a deep breath, then knocked. "Come in," his voice came from inside. I opened the door and stepped in. The door clicked shut behind me, soft but final, echoing in my head like a closing verdict. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I sat down, back straight, hands resting stiffly on my knees, barely daring to move. He looked at me for a moment, then frowned slightly. "Are you that tense?" I immediately shook my head. "No," I said, only to realize how dry my voice sounded. He let out a quiet breath, then softened his tone. "You handled last week's project well." I blinked in surprise, glanced up at him for a second, then quickly looked back down. "Thank you, sir. I also reviewed your report from yesterday. It was thorough," he continued, as if trying to ease the atmosphere. I nodded. "I can revise it if needed." "No, it's fine as it is," he said calmly. Every question, every comment was normal, strictly about work, and I could feel my breathing slowly steady, my shoulders loosening just a little. Then he paused, his expression turning more serious. "But there's something I want to ask you." My heartbeat picked up again. "Yes." I didn't dare look at him. "Lately, have you been avoiding me?" The question landed softly, but it made me freeze. No, I haven't, I replied, though even I could hear how unconvincing it sounded. He watched me for another second before continuing. About the company party, my hands tightened again. If that made you uncomfortable, he paused briefly, his voice lowering. I'm sorry. I looked up, startled. He remained composed. I didn't think much when I chose you. It was just the safest option for the game. My chest tightened sharply. I didn't mean to put you in an awkward position, he added. If it bothered you, I hope you won't let it affect your work, and I'd like things between us to go back to how they were before. I opened my mouth, wanting to say something, but in the end, I just nodded. It's fine, I said softly, my voice barely audible. He gave a small nod. Good. He didn't say anything else, and the silence made it clear the conversation was over. I stood up. I'll get back to work. All right, he replied briefly. I turned, walked to the door, my hand resting on the handle for a second before I opened it, and stepped out. The door closed behind me, and only then did I realize the dull ache spreading through my chest. Not sharp, not overwhelming, but steady, like something had been quietly and firmly taken away from me. I walked back down the hallway, step by step, trying to keep myself together, but in my head, only one sentence kept repeating. It was just a game. But what I didn't know was, from that moment on, nothing between us would ever be normal again, no matter what he thought. The next day, I stood outside his office door a few seconds longer than usual, took a breath, then knocked. Come in. I stepped inside. I brought the new draft, I said, placing the documents on his desk. He didn't look at them right away. He looked at me first, just for a moment, but it was enough to make me pause. Have a seat, Evan. My name, spoken that naturally, made something in my chest tighten. I sat down and pulled the chair in. I've shortened the timeline to 2 weeks. I started, speaking quickly, eyes fixed on the screen. Stop. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut cleanly through my words. I went quiet. Look at me, Evan. He said it calmly. I hesitated for a second, then lifted my gaze. Our eyes met, closer than I expected, longer than I was prepared for. Go on. He gave a small nod. I continued, slower this time. If we keep it at 3 weeks, the cost will increase. He kept looking at me, not at the document, just at me, and only after I finished did he glance down. Good, he said quietly, then shifted his chair closer. The distance between us narrowed until our shoulders lightly brushed. He didn't move away. Neither did I. Here, he pointed at the screen, his hand stopping right next to mine, not touching, but close enough for me to feel the warmth. What if we adjust this parameter? We could save about 15%, I answered. He nodded. I like that. Then, almost casually, he added, I like the way you explain things, Evan. I froze for half a second, not sure how to respond. Griffin Hart shouldn't look at me like that. He must be talking about the work, I told myself. The meeting stretched into the evening, the lights in the room softening as it got darker outside. Have you eaten? He asked. Not yet. Stay and eat with me. It wasn't really a question. I hesitated, then nodded. Okay. I picked up his phone. What do you feel like eating? You choose. I scrolled through a few options. This one okay? If you're picking, anything works. I paused for a beat, then placed the order. It's just convenient, I told myself. When the food arrived, we ate at the desk. We didn't talk much, but the silence didn't feel uncomfortable anymore. Are you always this quiet, Evan? He asked. I looked down at my food. Not really. Just not around me, he pressed. I looked up, surprised. He was watching me, calm, but like he was waiting for a real answer. I shook my head. That's not it. Then talk. His voice was soft. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He let out a small laugh. Next time, then. He stood up and walked behind me to look at the screen, close enough that I could feel him right there. Fix this part for me, he said, his hand resting lightly on the back of my chair behind my shoulder, not touching me, but close enough that I couldn't ignore it. Okay, I replied, keeping my voice steady. As I reached out to adjust the file, his hand moved at the same time, brushing mine. I pulled back immediately. Sorry. Don't be, Evan. This time, he didn't move his hand away right away, just a fraction slower, long enough for me to realize it didn't feel entirely accidental. My heartbeat slipped out of rhythm. Don't overthink it, I told myself. In the days that followed, everything stayed the same, and yet, not quite. You're avoiding my eyes again, Evan, he said once while I was presenting. I paused. I'm not. Look at me. It wasn't quite a command, but it wasn't a suggestion either. I looked up, too late to avoid it. His gaze held mine longer than it should have, unhurried, steady, like he was testing something. Then he gave a small nod. That's better. I immediately looked down, my heart racing. It's just work, I repeated in my head. But somehow, the distance between us kept disappearing, and what was happening between us no longer felt completely accidental. That night, we stayed late again, the project finally nearing its last stretch, the office almost empty, the quiet settling in like something heavier than usual. I stepped out to grab food, and when I came back, I stopped at the door, because Griffin Hart was asleep in his chair, head tilted slightly, tie loosened, the sharp, controlled version of him gone, replaced by something softer, unguarded, real, and my chest tightened before I even understood why. Maybe because I knew moments like this wouldn't last, that once the project ended, I wouldn't have a reason to stay this close to him anymore. And that thought alone pushed me forward, one slow step at a time, until I was standing right in front of him, close enough to see every detail I had memorized from a distance. I hesitated, just for a second, like I was standing at the edge of something I shouldn't cross, but my hand still lifted, my fingers brushing lightly against his cheek. Warm, real. I traced the line of his face slowly, the bridge of his nose, the faint tension still resting there even in sleep. And then my hand paused near his lips, the same lips I had only ever reached in dreams. And my heartbeat turned uneven, loud, impossible to ignore, but I didn't go further. I couldn't. I just stayed there, caught between wanting and stopping myself, until suddenly my wrist was caught, firm and sudden. I froze, my breath hitching as his eyes opened. But something was wrong. His gaze wasn't clear, wasn't steady, it was darker, heavier, burning in a way that made the air feel too thick to breathe. His hand was hot, too hot, as it tightened around my wrist. Griffin. I barely got his name out before he pulled me forward, and I lost my balance, falling straight into his chest, heat radiating off him instantly, his heartbeat fast and uneven against me, his arms wrapping around me, tight, almost desperate, like letting go wasn't an option. I instinctively tried to pull back, but he held me closer, and then his voice, low and rough, unsteady, right against my ear. I'm sorry. Evan, help me. Just for a little while. My name in his voice shattered whatever resistance I had left. It was too close, too real, too much like everything I had imagined, and I couldn't push him away. I couldn't say no. Instead, I went still, then slowly relaxed, letting him hold me, his hand sliding up to the back of my neck, fingers pressing there. And even though that place was supposed to be nothing, empty, unresponsive, a sharp shiver still ran through me. He leaned in, closer, his face near my neck, breathing uneven, searching, and then he murmured, voice low, almost disoriented, "You smell so good." Evan. Panic flickered through me, because there shouldn't be anything there, nothing at all, and yet he didn't let go, his grip tightening just slightly, as if he had found something only he could sense. And with every second, with every touch, every breath against my skin, my body started reacting in ways I couldn't understand, couldn't control, heat building under my skin, my thoughts scattering, a strange, unfamiliar dampness creeping in that made my breath catch, and I couldn't even name what was happening anymore, couldn't tell where it started or how to stop it, only that in his arms, with him calling my name like that, I was being pulled deeper into something I had no way of escaping. We stayed like that for a long time, his arms wrapped tightly around me, holding me as if I might slip away, and for a brief, fragile moment, it felt almost like we were something more than what we were supposed to be, like the space between us had quietly disappeared, until slowly, I felt his grip loosen, his arms falling away, the warmth of him lingering on my skin for just a second longer before it was gone. And that absence hit harder than I expected, a quiet ache settling in as I realized what it had been, a moment of lost control, nothing more, just the effect of his rut. His breathing gradually steadied, his voice returning to normal as he stepped back. "I'm sorry," he said, running a hand through his hair. It came earlier than I expected. I took something for it, but it must have taken time to kick in. I lowered my gaze, forcing myself to stay calm. "It's okay. I understand," I said softly, even though my chest still felt tight. We ate in an awkward silence after that, neither of us quite knowing what to say. And when we finally finished, he offered to drive me home. The ride was quiet, filled with everything we didn't say, while my mind stayed trapped in what had just happened, replaying it over and over, until his voice broke through. "We're here." I blinked, pulled back into reality. I reached for the door. "Thank you," I said, about to leave, but a hand caught mine, firm but not forceful, stopping me. I froze, my heart skipping. "I'm still waiting for your answer," he said, his voice lower now, steadier. "Answer to what?" I asked, barely above a whisper. "That night," he said, looking at me. "It wasn't just a game for me what I asked you. I meant it." My breath caught. "Do you want to be with me?" Everything went blank, like the world had tilted just slightly out of place. I couldn't tell if this was real or if I was still caught in some dream I hadn't woken up from yet. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to react. "I know you've been watching me," he added quietly, and I looked at him, startled, like I wanted to ask how he could possibly know that. He held my gaze, calm, certain. "Your eyes don't lie, Evan," he said. "You always look at me. You just didn't realize I've been." Looking back, something inside me gave way, and before I could process it, he leaned in, closing the distance between us, his lips brushing mine softly at first, hesitant, like he was giving me time to pull away, but I didn't. I couldn't. The moment stretched, deepened, the warmth of him grounding and overwhelming at the same time, until everything else faded into the background. And when we finally parted, I was left breathless, my thoughts scattered beyond recognition. "Can I take that as a yes?" he asked quietly, his voice almost teasing. I nodded without thinking. Unable to form words, he stepped out of the car, walked around, and opened the door for me, just like always, but nothing felt the same anymore. Before I could fully step away, he leaned in again, pressing a light kiss to my lips, softer this time, lingering just enough to leave an imprint. "Good night, Evan," he murmured, "my boyfriend." I walked into my apartment in a daze, everything around me blurred, unreal, and yet the warmth still lingering on my lips, the echo of his voice, the way he said my name. Those things told me this wasn't a dream. It was real. I was really with him now. And then the thought hit me all at once, sharp and impossible to ignore. I'm just a beta, so why would someone like Griffin Hart choose me? The next morning, I barely slept. I lay there all night with everything replaying in my head until the alarm went off, and it felt like I hadn't rested at all, my body heavy, my mind slow. I stood in front of the mirror for a few seconds, staring at the dark circles under my eyes before forcing myself out the door. I arrived at the office in a haze, everything slightly out of focus, until I walked in and saw him. Griffin was already there, like he always was. He looked up the moment I stepped in, his gaze lingering on my face just a second longer than usual. "Morning, Evan." It took me a beat to respond. "Good morning, Mr. Hart." My voice came out a little rough. He frowned slightly and walked closer. "You okay?" I nodded quickly. "I'm fine," but he didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes, and before I could step back, he reached out and caught my wrist, pulling me gently toward him, his fingers sliding down, weaving through mine, lacing our hands together like it was the most natural thing in the world, his palm warm against mine, holding just a little tighter than necessary. "Evan," he said, his voice dropping. I stilled, my heartbeat slipping out of rhythm. "You're not fine." Before I could argue, his other hand came up to my forehead, the distance between us closing until I could feel his breath. "You didn't sleep," he murmured, like a quiet conclusion, and he still hadn't let go of my hand, his fingers tightening slightly, as if he had no intention of letting go. I swallowed. "I'm really okay," I repeated, but my voice lacked conviction. He studied me for a second longer, then let out a soft breath, still holding my hand, not rushing to release it. "Don't call me that when it's just us," he said quietly, close enough that only I could hear. I froze. "Griffin," I said without thinking, almost instinctively. He gave a faint smile, subtle and close, and only then did he finally let go, though the warmth lingered in my hand. "Conference room. 5 minutes." His tone shifted back to professional, but his eyes hadn't. When we stepped into the conference room and the door closed behind us, the atmosphere changed instantly, cut off from everything outside. I hadn't even set my files down before he moved closer, one hand bracing against the table behind me, blocking the distance, still out of it. He asked softly. I swallowed. "I'm fine now." "Doesn't look like it," he said, his gaze settling on my face. Then without warning, his hand lifted and brushed lightly against my cheek. Gentle, but enough to make me freeze completely. Evan, he said, this time not in his usual work tone, but something quieter, softer. Before I could react, he pulled me just a little closer, and his lips touched mine. Quick, but deliberate. No longer something that could be brushed off as accidental. I stilled, my heart racing, my fingers instinctively gripping the edge of the table behind me. He pulled back first, but didn't fully step away, his breath still close. Awake now? He murmured, a faint curve at the corner of his lips. I couldn't answer. Just stood there, my mind blank, and I realized, even here, in the middle of the office, in these brief, hidden moments, the way his fingers had laced with mine, the way the distance between us kept disappearing, everything had already crossed a line I could no longer pretend wasn't there. Later, just when I thought things might settle back into something manageable, he showed up at my desk again, this time with no documents, no work-related excuse. Evan, he said, and I looked up almost immediately, like I'd been waiting for it. Are you free tonight? I paused, my thoughts lagging behind the question. Tonight? Dinner, he added, like it was the simplest thing in the world, with me. My fingers tightened slightly around my pen. Is this work? I asked. Even though I already knew the answer, he held my gaze steady. No. A brief pause, just enough to make my heart skip. It's a date. Everything inside me stilled. I didn't answer right away, couldn't, and for a second, he tilted his head slightly, studying my reaction. Unless you don't want it to be, he added, quieter this time. And that was what broke whatever hesitation I had left. I'll go, I said. Almost too quickly, he smiled. Not wide, just enough. Good. Then he walked away like he hadn't just shifted something in my entire world. That evening, when I stepped out of the building, he was already there waiting by the car, and what made me stop in my tracks was the small bouquet in his hand. Not flashy, just simple and carefully arranged, but it made my heart skip all over again. For you, he said, handing it to me. I hesitated for a second before taking it. Thank you, I said softly, unable to hide my surprise. He opened the car door for me like always, but his gaze lingered just a little longer this time. Dinner itself wasn't dramatic, and somehow that made everything feel more real. The way he pulled out my chair, the way his hand rested briefly at the small of my back as we walked in, light, guiding, but lingering just a second too long. When we sat down, he didn't let go of my hand right away. Instead, he took it gently across the table, his fingers threading through mine, warm, steady, like it belonged there. I froze for a second, my heart picking up, but I didn't pull away. I let it happen, feeling every small movement of his hand, his thumb brushing slowly over the back of mine as we talked, making it impossible for me to focus on anything else. And at one point, he lifted my hand slightly, naturally, like it was nothing unusual, then leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to the back of it. Unhurried, unshowy, but enough to make my thoughts go completely blank. I looked at him, completely thrown off, and he just looked back, calm, like nothing special had happened. You're more talkative here, he noted. I glanced down at my glass, trying to steady myself. Maybe. Or maybe you're just less nervous, he said, and I almost laughed. I'm still nervous, I admitted. He leaned back slightly, watching me. I know, he said, and something in his voice made my chest tighten again. After dinner, he walked me outside, the night air cooler, quieter, and when we reached the car, he didn't open the door right away. Instead, his hand found mine again, fingers slipping between mine like it belonged there, natural, unhurried. Evan, he said, softer now, and when I looked up, he was already closer than I expected, his thumb brushing lightly over my hand, grounding, steady, relax, he murmured, and somehow that made it worse, or better. I couldn't tell anymore, because I was already leaning into it, into him, into whatever this was becoming. The distance disappeared again, but this time it wasn't rushed, wasn't accidental. His hand came up to my cheek, guiding gently, and when his lips met mine, it was slower, deeper than before, not overwhelming, just enough to make everything feel real, undeniably real. My fingers tightening slightly around his like I needed something to hold on to, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was imagining it, or borrowing a moment that didn't belong to me. This felt chosen. When we finally pulled apart, neither of us moved far, his forehead resting lightly against mine for just a second. You're thinking too much again, he said quietly. I let out a small breath. I hesitated, then looked at him. properly, searching. Why me? The question slipped out before I could stop it. I'm not anything special. My voice dropped slightly. I didn't finish the sentence, but I knew he understood. He didn't answer right away, just looked at me like he was weighing something. Then his hand tightened slightly around mine. You really don't see it? He asked softly. I shook my head, and for the first time, he didn't look amused or calm or in control. He looked certain. Then I guess I'll just have to show you, he said, his thumb brushing once more over my hand. And this time, when he leaned in again, there was no hesitation left between us at all. We didn't get into the car right away. We just stood there in the quiet, the city noise fading into the background, his hand still holding mine, fingers laced, warm and steady. Why me? I asked again, softer this time. Griffin didn't hesitate. He looked straight at me. From the first day I walked into that office, I noticed you, he said, simple and direct. You weren't like the others. I frowned. I'm just a beta, I said, and even to my own ears it sounded small. He stepped closer. No, you're not just anything, he said, his hand lifting to brush lightly against my cheek, keeping me from looking away. You kept sneaking glances at me, and every time I caught you, you'd freeze, then disappear. He smirked faintly, like a rabbit. My face burned instantly. There are dozens of people in that office who like you. I pushed back. Why me? He didn't take long to answer. Because you never try to be noticed, and I still noticed you, he said, straightforward, his grip on my hand tightening slightly. You work harder than anyone, he went on. Not to impress anyone, but because you think that's the only way you're enough? I went quiet, unable to argue. He watched me for a second, then continued, still direct. I saw you sit there and listen to a client yell at you for almost an hour, he said. No interruptions, no reaction, just listening. I stiffened slightly. And in the end, that same client sent a letter praising you, he added. Everyone thinks you're gentle, that you just take it. He paused, his gaze locking onto mine. But I know exactly the kind of tricks you use to deal with coworkers who try to play dirty. My heart skipped. Of course he knows, he sees everything. I didn't respond. He went on. You don't fight loud, but you don't lose either. My fingers tightened in his without thinking. He stepped closer again, his other hand resting lightly at the side of my neck, holding me in place. And you're kind in a way that makes no sense, he said, blunt as ever. You jumped into the water to save a stray puppy, then stood there regretting your phone. I closed my eyes for a second, embarrassed. He let out a quiet breath, his tone softening just a little. It was stupid, but it was real. I didn't know what to say, just stood there. And every month, you send half your paycheck to that orphanage, he continued. I froze. That's where I grew up? I said quietly. They took care of me. I just wanted to give something back, he nodded once. Yeah, I figured. Then he looked at me again, steady, clear. You were raised right, his hand tightened around mine. You're smart. You work hard, and you're not weak. He paused, then said it plainly. And you're beautiful. I shot back immediately. Beautiful how? I'm nothing compared to an Omega. He didn't hesitate. I don't care about Omegas, he said, firm. If I think you're beautiful, that's enough. My heart skipped. Then when did you start liking me? I asked. He held my gaze. When I realized I kept looking for you, he said. Every room, every meeting, my eyes went to you first. His grip tightened slightly. After that, it stopped being a choice. I swallowed. But I'm just a beta, I said, softer now, less certain. I can't give you anything. He cut me off. I don't need it, he said, direct. Medication is enough. Then he paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. But, his voice lowered. Are you really a beta? My heart skipped. But this. Tom, I didn't hesitate. I looked straight at him and answered immediately, firm and certain. It's just laundry detergent. No pause, no doubt. Like it was obvious. He studied me for a second, like he was weighing it. Then didn't push further, just tightened his hold on my hand. But inside me something shifted. His question lingered. Should I tell him that I'm actually a defective Omega, that I don't have pheromones, that I don't go into heat, that I'm nothing like any Omega he's ever known? I looked at him, at the way he held my hand, the way he looked at me without hesitation. Then I took a quiet breath and pushed it all down. Not now. I'll tell him. Just not yet. And before I could think any further, his hand lifted to my chin, tilting my face up, pulling me closer, his lips brushing against mine, slow and certain, like none of those questions mattered right now. It happened on an ordinary night, the kind of quiet that makes everything feel closer than it should. We had just gotten back to my apartment after a long day. Griffin set his keys down like he'd done it 100 times before. Natural, familiar. You should get some rest, he said, loosening his tie. You look exhausted. I nodded, trying to stay normal. I'll put on some music, I said, leaving my phone on the table before heading into the kitchen to make tea. A few minutes later, the music suddenly cut off, and then a voice filled the room. His voice, low and unmistakable. I like you. Will you be my boyfriend? My heart stopped for a second, the cup in my hand almost slipping. I turned immediately, rushing back out. Wait. I grabbed my phone, quickly switching the track, my fingers unsteady, not daring to look at him. But then I froze. Griffin was standing by the shelf, a small stack of photos in his hand. Photos of him. Photos I had taken. The drawer beside him still slightly open. My stomach dropped. Griffin, my voice caught. He looked at me, not angry, not upset, just tilting his head slightly like he was putting things together. The drawer was open, he said calmly, lifting the photos a little. And I saw pictures of myself, so I got curious. I didn't know what to say, just stood there, completely still. He glanced briefly at my phone, then back at me. That recording just now, he said, not finishing the sentence. But I understood. My grip tightened around the phone. My mind blanked for a second before I let out a breath. It was from that night, I said, quietly. The company party. He didn't interrupt, just watched me. Waiting, I swallowed. I recorded it. I admitted, no point hiding it now. Not just that. I added, my eyes flicking to the photos in his hand. Those two. The silence stretched for a moment, heavy but not sharp. I know it's weird, I said quickly, my voice lower. I know it probably looks creepy. I let out a quiet breath. If you're uncomfortable, Evan, he cut in, calm and steady. I stopped immediately. He looked at me, then down at the photos, flipping through them slowly. Not like he was judging, more like he was taking them in. You kept all of this? He asked, no accusation in his tone. I nodded slightly. Yeah, because I like you. I added, forcing the truth out. He was quiet for a second, then set the photos down carefully on the table, like they mattered. Then he walked toward me, slow, deliberate, until there was almost no space left between us. His hand lifted, brushing my wrist before sliding down to lace our fingers together. Natural, familiar, like nothing had changed. I'm not uncomfortable, he said, direct. I think it's clear. I looked up at him, surprised. Clear? He nodded. Slightly, his thumb brushing over the back of my hand. You've liked me for a long time, he said, like it was obvious. And you've been really bad at hiding it. Heat rushed to my face. I couldn't argue. He studied me for a second, then lifted my chin, making me look at him. You don't have to hide from me, he said, his voice lower now, steady. Not anymore. My heart pounded hard against my ribs. You don't think it's weird? I asked quietly. He shook his head. No, he said, certain. I think it's real. Then he leaned in, his lips brushing mine, slow and deliberate. Not rushed, just enough to make everything else go quiet. And from that moment on, things changed, not all at once, but in all the small ways that mattered. He started staying over without asking. I stopped pretending I wasn't waiting for him. Mornings became shared coffee in the kitchen, quiet and easy. He'd stand behind me, his hand resting lightly at my waist as he reached past me for a mug, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sometimes his fingers would find mine without looking, lacing together like a habit. Evenings slowed down, softer. We'd sit close on the couch, shoulders pressed together, his arm draped behind me, pulling me a little closer without a word, like he didn't even realize he was doing it. But he did. He always did. Stay. He'd say when I shifted, just one word, low and easy, and I would, because I wanted to, because being near him felt right. Too right. Nights blurred into shared routines, quiet meals, small touches, lingering looks that lasted a second too long. And for the first time in my life, everything felt real, not imagined, not one-sided, real enough that I didn't need to replay those recordings to fall asleep anymore, because now, I had him, right there beside me, real, warm, close enough to touch. About 4 months in, I stopped pretending I didn't know exactly what I was doing every time I lingered by his car. It always started the same way, a normal workday. A casual, I'll walk you out. And then somehow we were still standing there 10, 20 minutes later, neither of us getting in. You're doing it again, Griffin said one night, leaning against the driver's door, watching me like he already knew. I looked away. Doing what? Stalling, he said. Simple. I let out a quiet breath. Didn't argue this time. Stay a little longer, I said, barely above a whisper. He didn't smile. Not really. But something in his expression softened. Instead of opening the door, he reached out, caught my wrist, and laced his fingers through mine, firm, like he wasn't planning to let go anytime soon. You're not even trying to leave anymore, he said, low. I glanced down at our hands, then back at him. I know. That became our rhythm without either of us saying it out loud. Quick dinners, turning into long conversations in parking lots, takeout bags forgotten between us while we talked about nothing important. Some nights we stayed in the car with the engine off, windows cracked, city noise drifting in, neither of us in a hurry to fill the silence. Other nights I'd say something dumb just to break it, then immediately regret it, and he'd look at me for a second too long before answering, like he was holding back a smile, like he didn't want to make it worse for me. You always overthink it after, he said once, and I frowned. Overthink what? Everything, he said, and for a second, I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't, and somehow that silence said enough. Griffin never rushed me. Not once. Every step forward always felt like mine, but he was always right there, close enough that I didn't have to reach far. Sometimes his hand would slide from mine to the back of my neck, thumb brushing lightly like he was grounding me. Sometimes he'd just stand too close. Close enough that I could feel his breath when he spoke. You're thinking too much again, he said one night. Low and quiet, I huffed a small laugh. I always do. Then stop, he said, like it was that easy, and for a second, I almost believed him. It wasn't some big moment, nothing dramatic, just small things stacking up until they started to matter, until staying felt easier than leaving, until I stopped coming up with reasons to keep him there. You can come up, if you want, I said one night, standing by the car, not looking at him directly. There was a pause, not long, just enough to make my chest tighten. If I do, he said, stepping closer, his hand still holding mine. Things don't stay the same. I swallowed, my grip tightening slightly. I know, I said, and that was it. The first time didn't feel like crossing a line. It felt like finally stepping into something we had both been circling for months. Nothing rushed, nothing out of control, just the same steady way we'd always been, sitting too close on the couch, shoulders touching, hands brushing and then staying, his hand moving to my waist, slow, deliberate, like he was giving me time to stop him. But I didn't. I never did. You sure? He asked quietly, his forehead almost touching mine. I nodded, and everything that followed felt like a continuation, not a change. After that, nothing went backward. It only moved forward, naturally, easily. Nights together became more frequent. No hesitation, no second guessing. I'd text him without thinking. He'd show up without needing a reason. Sometimes we barely talked, just existed in the same space, his hand resting on my knee, my fingers hooked loosely in his shirt, small things that didn't feel small anymore. Sometimes it was laughter, soft and unguarded. Sometimes it was silence that didn't need to be filled. Sometimes it was the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. And every time, it felt a little more real, a little more solid, like something was settling into place without either of us needing to name it. And somewhere along the way, I didn't even notice when it happened, but leaving stopped being an option. Not for me. Not anymore. It happened so quietly, I didn't even realize it until it was already too late. I had always been careful, obsessively careful. I knew my body, knew exactly what it was capable of, and I never let myself forget that. Every time we got close, I made sure there was protection, no exceptions, or at least, that's what I believed. I don't know when it slipped. I don't know which moment I stopped paying attention, or maybe I just trusted too much. But one morning, standing alone in my bathroom, staring at two faint pink lines on a small plastic stick, everything inside me went completely still. My fingers loosened, the test nearly slipping from my hand as I slowly sank down against the cold tile floor. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel scared. Not at first. I just felt empty, like my mind refused to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. I kept staring at it, waiting for it to change, for one of the lines to disappear, for something to tell me I was wrong. But it didn't. It stayed there, quiet and certain. I was pregnant, the thought came. slowly. Then all at once, crashing into everything, my chest tightened, my breathing uneven. I wasn't ready, not even close. I had never planned for this, never even imagined it could happen like this. And more than anything, I had never asked him what he would do if it did. But then the memory surfaced, sharp and clear, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. Do you ever want kids? I had asked once, trying to sound casual, like it didn't matter. He didn't hesitate, not even for a second. No. Just one word, flat, certain, final, and I remembered laughing it off back then, like it meant nothing. But now that word echoed in my head, louder and louder, until it drowned out everything else. No, no, no. I pressed my hand over my mouth, forcing myself to breathe through the panic rising in my chest. If he knew, what would he do? I didn't need to ask, I already had my answer. And it terrified me, so I made a decision right there, sitting on that cold bathroom floor. I wouldn't tell him, not now. Maybe not ever. I told myself I just needed time. Time to think, time to figure things out. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was afraid. Afraid he would ask me to get rid of it. Afraid that I wouldn't be able to say no. And after that, everything became harder. Nothing changed on the surface. I still went to work, still saw him, still let him hold my hand, still let him stay over. But inside, something had shifted. My body started giving me away in small, quiet ways. Nausea hitting me without warning. Dizziness that made me grip the edge of my desk just to stay upright. Exhaustion that no amount of sleep seemed to fix. I started pulling back without meaning to, avoiding his eyes, stepping away when he got too close, finding reasons to leave early, to go home alone, to not let him stay the night. You're doing it again, he said one evening, his voice low, familiar, but this time it didn't feel the same. I forced a small smile. Doing what? Even I could hear how weak it sounded. His gaze lingered on me, longer than usual, searching, like he could feel something was wrong but couldn't see it yet. You're pulling away, he said quietly, not accusing, just certain. My chest tightened. I looked away. I'm just tired, the easiest lie I had. But this time, it didn't feel like something I could keep saying for much longer, because the truth was, I wasn't just tired, I was hiding something that could break everything between us, if he ever found out. I needed to know, before it was too late, not guess, not hope. No. So I started small, like it didn't mean anything, like I wasn't testing him at all. Whenever we walked past a park, a sidewalk, anywhere there was a child nearby, I slowed down, sometimes stopped completely, crouching a little to make a face at them, letting them grab my fingers, laugh at nothing. But my attention was never really on them. It was on Griffin, always on him, watching the way his eyes followed me, not the child. Me, like he was trying to figure something out I hadn't said out loud. And that only made it harder to breathe. One afternoon, we passed a young mother standing near the curb, gently rocking a newborn wrapped in a soft blanket. I stopped without thinking, my eyes fixed on the tiny movement. Cute, right? She smiled. Noticing me, I nodded a little. Too quickly. Yeah, really cute. She studied me for half a second, then asked, do you want to hold him? My body went still, instinctively. I looked at Griffin. He didn't move, didn't say anything, just watched, so I nodded, slow, careful. The baby was placed into my arms, and the moment his weight settled against me, something inside my chest tightened sharply. He was warm, impossibly small, so fragile I felt like even breathing wrong could hurt him. My hands adjusted automatically, holding him closer, like my body already knew how. His tiny fingers curled against my sleeve, and that small, simple touch hit me harder than anything else. My throat tightened, my vision blurred for just a second. I swallowed it down, forcing myself to stay steady. You're doing great, the mother said softly. I let out a shaky breath, almost a laugh. He's lighter than I expected, I murmured, still not looking away. For a moment, everything else disappeared. Then I remembered why I was doing this. I turned, just slightly. Do you want to try? I asked, looking at Griffin. But the second our eyes met, I knew something was wrong. He didn't step forward, didn't even shift. His jaw tightened just a little. His gaze no longer soft, something in it closing off. He took half a step back, almost unnoticeable. But I saw it. I felt it. My chest dropped. I didn't push it, couldn't. I quickly handed the baby back, forcing a polite smile. Thank you, I said, stepping away. He's adorable. The mother smiled. You'll be a great parent someday. My fingers curled slightly at my side. I nodded. I hope so. My voice quieter now. Then I turned away. Take care. I added, not trusting myself to stay longer. Griffin followed, silent, the space between us heavier than before. I could feel it pressing against my chest. After a few steps, I couldn't take it anymore. Why do you look upset? I asked, glancing at him. He didn't answer right away, his gaze fixed ahead, like he was choosing his words carefully. Then finally, I was thinking, his voice low, controlled. Thinking what? I pressed. He stopped walking, so I had to stop too. Then he turned to me, really looked this time, sharp, searching, like he was trying to see through me. Are you regretting it? My heart dropped so fast it almost hurt. Regretting what? I asked, my voice tighter now. He held my gaze, didn't look away. This, he said, steady. Us. I felt my chest tighten, something twisting deep inside. Why would you think that? I asked, but even to my own ears, it didn't sound convincing enough. His expression didn't soften. Because people always go back, he said, quieter now, but heavier. To what makes sense? I frowned slightly. What does that even mean? He exhaled slowly. Like this wasn't something he wanted to say, but couldn't hold back anymore. A normal life, he said. Marriage, kids, all of that. The word lingered in the air between us, heavier than anything else he had said, and for a second, I couldn't speak. Because the irony hit so hard it almost made me dizzy. He thought I was the one who might walk away for that kind of life, when in reality, I was already standing in the middle of it, carrying something that would change everything, alone. And the worst part was, he didn't even know. The silence between us didn't break after that conversation. It stretched, heavy, uncomfortable, following us through the rest of the evening. I could feel it in every step, every breath, every glance I avoided. And I knew I couldn't keep this up much longer, not when everything inside me was already on the edge of falling apart. I stopped walking first, my hand tightening into a fist at my side. Griffin. My voice came out lower than I expected. He turned to me immediately, like he had been waiting for this, his eyes sharp, searching. What is it? He asked, steady. I swallowed, my throat dry, my fingers trembling slightly before I clenched them again, forcing myself to stay still. What if I told you? I hesitated, my gaze dropping for a second before I forced it back up. That I don't really have a choice anymore. His brows drew together just slightly, confusion flashing across his face. What does that mean? He asked, slower now, more cautious. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I could still turn back, still lie, still pretend nothing was wrong, but I couldn't, because it's already happening. I said, my voice barely steady, and for a second, he didn't react, like the words hadn't fully reached him yet. Then I took a breath, deeper this time, and said it. I'm pregnant. Everything went quiet, completely, like the world around us had just stopped. Griffin didn't move, didn't speak, his eyes locked on mine, unreadable, and for a moment, I thought I had made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I didn't look away, I couldn't anymore. And I'm not a beta. I added, softer now, but clearer than anything I had ever said before. I saw it then, the shift in his expression, the way something flickered across his eyes, shock, realization, something deeper I couldn't name. My chest tightened, but I kept going, because I had already crossed the line. There was no turning back now. I wanted to tell you, I said, my voice breaking just slightly despite my effort to hold it together. But you said you didn't want kids. The words came out faster now, like they had been trapped for too long. And I thought, if you knew, you'd ask me to get rid of it. My fingers dug into my palm, grounding myself, and I didn't know if I could say no to you. Silence, heavier than before, stretching between us. I couldn't read him, couldn't tell what he was thinking, and that terrified me more than anything else. I forced myself to speak again, even though my voice felt tight, fragile. That day, when you said people go back to something normal, I let out a small, shaky breath. I'm already there. My hand moved slightly, almost unconsciously, resting over my abdomen. I just didn't tell you. Another pause, longer this time, and I braced myself for whatever would come next, my heart hammering, my breath shallow, waiting, because now, there was nothing left to hide anymore. For a few seconds, Griffin didn't say anything. He just looked at me like he was trying to make sense of everything at once. I could hear my heartbeat, loud, uneven, filling the silence. I braced myself, waiting for him to step back, to say something that would end this, but he didn't. He took a slow breath, ran a hand briefly over his face, then looked back at me, sharper now. Say that again, he said, low. I swallowed, forcing the words out. I'm pregnant. No hesitation this time. His gaze dropped for a split second to where my hand rested over my abdomen, then back to my face, his jaw tightening. How far along? He asked, direct. I blinked, caught off guard. I'm not sure yet. He nodded once, already thinking ahead. We're going to a doctor. Not a question. I stared at him, my chest tightening. Griffin, I thought you. I said I didn't want kids. He cut in, calm but firm. I didn't say I'd walk away if it happened. The words hit hard, something in my chest cracking open. You should have told me, he added, quieter now. I looked down, fingers curling. I was scared, I admitted, barely a whisper. I thought you'd tell me to get rid of it. No, he said immediately, sharper this time. I flinched and he noticed, his voice lowering, steadier. Don't decide that for me. I lifted my eyes, searching his face, still trying to understand. And the beta thing? He asked after a beat. More careful now. I hesitated, then nodded. I'm an Omega, I said, the words settling differently now that it was out. Just not a normal one. He didn't question it, didn't doubt it, just watched me, processing. That night, he said slowly. I wasn't imagining it. I shook my head. No, silence again. But this time it didn't feel like something breaking. It felt like something shifting into place. Griffin stepped closer, steady, his hand reaching out, pausing just long enough to give me the choice. I didn't move, so he closed the distance, his fingers wrapping around my wrist, sliding down to lace with mine. Familiar, grounding. We figure this out, he said, looking straight at me, a brief pause. Then, together, my throat tightened, my vision blurred, and for the first time since I saw those two lines, I could finally breathe. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and something too clean to be comforting. I sat on the edge of the exam bed, fingers twisting together while Griffin stood a step away, arms folded but eyes fixed on me, steady, present. The doctor glanced over the report, then back at me. You're a little run down, she said, matter of fact. Stress. Early symptoms, nothing alarming, but you need rest. I nodded, barely listening. And you shouldn't be handling this alone, she added, her gaze shifting briefly to Griffin. Staying close to your alpha will help. Consistent pheromone exposure can stabilize both you and the baby. You may not sense it clearly, but that doesn't mean your body, or the baby, doesn't need it. The words landed heavier than expected. I felt Griffin's attention. Sharpened beside me, the doctor continued. Reduce stress, regular checkups, and don't isolate yourself. She closed the file with a soft snap. You'll be fine if you take care of it properly. Outside the clinic, the air felt different, lighter, but also heavier in a way I couldn't explain. I took a few steps before Griffin caught my wrist, the now familiar grip grounding me instantly. You're coming home with me, he said. Not harsh, just certain. I blinked. Griffin, you heard her, he cut in, calmer now, but no less firm. You shouldn't be alone. I hesitated, instinctively pulling back a little. I can manage. No, he said. Simple. And this time he didn't let go, his fingers tightening slightly around mine before lacing them together. You don't have to. I looked at him, searching. You're half asking, half forcing me. I muttered, a weak attempt at resistance. Something in his expression shifted, softer, but unwavering. Then say I'm not giving you a better option, he replied, quiet, direct. I exhaled slowly, the tension leaving my shoulders without me realizing it. Fine, I said at last, and something in his gaze eased, just a little, his thumb brushing lightly over the back of my hand. Good, he said, softer now, as if that was all he needed. On the drive back, the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It settled around us in a way that felt stable, safe. When we reached his place, he didn't rush anything, just guided me inside like it had always been this way. Like there was no question about it. Later that evening, when I was sitting on the couch, still trying to process everything, he spoke again, quieter this time. I've always been able to sense it. I looked up, confused. Sense what? He met my eyes, steady. Your pheromones. My breath caught. I shook my head instinctively. I don't have any. You do, he said, not arguing, just stating it like fact. They're faint, almost non-existent, he admitted, but they're there. I stared at him, unable to respond. I thought I was imagining it at first. He continued, his gaze not leaving mine. But it never went away. Something in my chest tightened. So maybe, he added after a second, his voice lower now. Almost thoughtful. I'm the only one who can tell. I let out a small, uneven breath, not sure what to say to that. Something about it felt too much like fate, like something I didn't dare believe in. The days after that settled into a rhythm I hadn't expected. Quiet mornings when I woke up before him and just watched the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Evenings where he'd pull me back down beside him when I tried to get up too early. Stay, he'd murmur, half asleep, his arm tightening around me just enough that I didn't argue. Meals were simple, sometimes takeout, sometimes something he threw together without much effort, but he always made sure I ate. Always watched just a little too closely to see if I finished everything. Small things, constant things. The way his hand would find mine without thinking. The way he'd rest his palm lightly at my lower back when we walked, like he was anchoring me there, grounding me, and slowly, without me realizing when it happened, that tight, restless feeling inside me started to ease, like my body was finally allowed to settle. One afternoon, he stepped away to get the car, telling me to wait near the entrance of the clinic for our next appointment. I nodded, staying where I was, absently holding the folded medical report in my hand. Hey, a familiar voice called out. I turned, and my stomach dropped slightly. A colleague from the office stood there, looking at me, then at the paper in my hand, curiosity flashing across her face. What are you doing here? She asked, stepping closer, her eyes dropping again to the report, and before I could react, she had already caught the words printed on it. Her expression changed. Instantly, surprise widening her eyes. Then something else, something sharper. Wait, is that a pregnancy checkup? She looked back at me, stunned. You have a girlfriend? My fingers tightened slightly around the paper. I didn't answer, didn't correct her, just gave a small, non-committal shrug. And that was enough. Her eyes lit up with a mix of shock and excitement. Wow, I didn't know you had it in you, she said, half laughing, already piecing together her own version of the story. I forced a faint smile, saying nothing, and in that moment, I knew this wasn't going to stay quiet for long. The rumor didn't fade. It sharpened, turned into something people repeated like it was already proven. By the time the meeting started, I could feel it in the room. The way conversations dipped when I walked in, the way no one looked at me for too long. Then someone finally said it out loud, not directly at me, but loud enough. Some people move up fast these days. A few quiet laughs followed. I didn't react immediately, just set my folder down, opened it, then looked up, calm, steady, since. We're talking about that, I said, and the room went still. Let's be clear, I tapped the page once. Last quarter, I closed 53% of this team's total output. No one moved. Every report is logged. Every number is traceable. I added, voice even. If anyone here thinks I didn't earn this position, say it now. Silence. Not a single person spoke. Not a single person met my eyes. I let that sit for a second, then continued, just a little colder. And since fairness seems to matter so much today, HR will be reviewing individual performance next cycle. A chair shifted. Someone looked down at their hands. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. As for the rest, I added, what I do outside of work isn't part of your job description. That should have been enough. For me, it was. But then someone pushed it further, a little too bold, a little too late. So the girlfriend thing isn't true. The room tightened again. I didn't answer right away, and that hesitation was all they needed. I heard she's pregnant. The same voice continued. If that's true, isn't this a little unethical? A few people glanced between each other, waiting, watching, and then, that part is true. Griffin's voice cut in from the doorway, low, controlled, but it hit harder than anything said before. Every head turned. He walked in without rushing, without hesitation, his presence alone shifting the air in the room. His gaze swept once, then landed on me for half a second before moving back to the group. The pregnancy, he said, calm, precise, is real. A pause, just long enough for tension to spike. And that child, his eyes hardened slightly, is mine. Silence dropped like something physical, heavy, undeniable. Someone's breath hitched. Someone else looked away too fast. The person who spoke earlier went completely pale, but they stammered. You're an alpha. He's a beta. Griffin didn't even let them finish, just tilted his head slightly, expression unreadable. Then I guess, he said. Voice quieter now, but sharper. You can figure out the rest. No one answered no. One dared. He didn't push further, didn't explain, didn't justify. He didn't need to. His hand reached for mine, fingers sliding between mine, lacing together, firm, deliberate, in full view of everyone. As for his promotion, he continued, almost casually now, it has nothing to do with me. A beat. Then, colder. If anything, I've been holding it back. A few people visibly tensed, because he was already outperforming most of you. No one spoke, not a word, not even a breath too loud. Griffin gave a small nod, like the matter was settled, because to him, it was, meeting's over, he said simply, then turned, still holding my hand, and walked out, not once looking back. The hallway outside felt quieter, like the world had been muted. I pulled my hand slightly, forcing myself to look at him. Why did you say that? My voice came out lower than I expected. You didn't have to make it public, he stopped. Turned to me fully this time, his grip on my hand tightening, just a little. Not enough to hurt, just enough to keep me there. I wanted to, he said. No hesitation, no regret. I frowned slightly. What if this causes trouble for you? I asked. He looked at me for a second, then a corner of his mouth lifted, faint, almost amused. I've been waiting for a reason to do that, he said, voice softer now, but steadier than anything else. Looks like I finally got one. The fallout at work settled faster than I expected, not because people suddenly changed, but because there was nothing left for them to argue with. The numbers spoke, Griffin's words sealed it, and for the first time in a long while, things felt quiet. A few days later, Griffin told me to keep a weekend open, no explanation, no hints, just a simple pack warm. I didn't ask more. I had learned by now that when he said things like that, he already had everything planned. When we arrived, I understood why. A private winter cabin tucked deep in the mountains, far from the city, far from noise, surrounded by endless white, the kind of place that felt untouched, almost unreal. I stood there for a second longer than necessary, taking it in, the silence, the snow, the air so clean it almost hurt to breathe. You like it? Griffin asked from behind me. I turned, nodding without thinking. It's beautiful. He watched me for a moment. Then his gaze dropped briefly, not to me, but lower, softer. Good, he said. All three of us needed this. My hand moved instinctively to my stomach, barely showing, but real enough to change everything. I let out a small breath, something between a laugh and something else I couldn't quite name. Yeah, all three of us. It was my first real trip like this, not a rushed business. Stop. Not something half-finished, but an actual break, and I felt it in the way my shoulders slowly relaxed, in the way I didn't check my phone every few minutes, in the way Griffin stayed close without saying much. The cabin itself was warm and quiet, wood and soft lighting, large windows looking out over the snow-covered slopes. There was staff that came by during the day to restock, clean, leave meals, then disappeared again, leaving us alone with the kind of privacy that felt almost dangerous in how peaceful it was. The first day passed slowly. We unpacked, settled in. I wandered from room to room like I needed to memorize it all. Griffin mostly watched, stepping in only. When I moved too fast, a hand at my elbow, a quiet, careful. The second day, we walked outside, the snow thick under our boots, the cold sharp but refreshing. Griffin adjusted my scarf without asking, his fingers lingering just a second longer than needed. I pretended not to notice, but I didn't move away either. At one point I slipped slightly on the ice, and he caught me before I even registered it, his hand firm around mine, fingers threading through mine naturally. He didn't let go after that, just kept walking, like it was the most normal thing in the world. By the third day, everything had settled into a rhythm, slow mornings, quiet meals, small touches that didn't need to be explained, the kind of calm that made it easy to forget everything outside those walls. And maybe that was why I didn't notice it right away. The shift, subtle at first, Griffin a little quieter, a little more distant in the way his hand rested on me, not pulling away, but holding back. I told myself it was nothing, that it was just the cold, the isolation, the long days, until that night, when the storm came in faster than expected, the wind picking up, the windows rattling, and something in the air changed with it, the kind of change you don't see, but feel, just before everything breaks. The shift hit all at once, not loud, not obvious, just wrong in a way I couldn't ignore. Griffin's arm tightened around me for a second before going still. His breathing slowed, then deepened, heavier than it should have been. I tilted my head, looking up at him. Griffin? He didn't answer, his gaze fixed somewhere past me. Jaw set. I pushed myself up from the couch, the blanket sliding off my shoulders. Hey, what's wrong? A pause. Then he exhaled through his nose, controlled but strained. Nothing, he said, too quick. I knew that tone. Don't lie to me, I said quietly. His eyes flicked to mine. Something sharp, something conflicted. Then he stood abruptly, the movement too sudden. I'll be back, he muttered, already turning away. Griffin, I stepped after him, but he was faster, heading straight for the bedroom. The door shut, and then, click, the lock turned, the sound small but final. I froze for half a second before moving again, reaching the door, knocking. Griffin, open the door. Silence, then the faint sound of his breathing on the other side. Uneven now, I pressed my palm flat against the wood. You're in rut, aren't you? A few seconds passed, then his voice came through, lower, rougher. Yeah, my chest tightened instantly. Where's your meds? Another pause, longer, heavier. Didn't bring enough. My stomach dropped. I turned, grabbing my phone, dialing with hands. That felt colder than the storm outside. The line connected. I spoke fast, clear, but the answer came back just as quickly. We can't reach you until morning. The roads are blocked. I closed my eyes briefly, forcing myself to stay steady, then hung up and went back to the door, knocking again, harder this time. Let me in. No. The response came immediately, sharp, like he had been waiting for that exact request. Griffin, I can help you, I said, lowering my voice, trying to ground him. You're pregnant, he shot back, his voice strained but firm. You don't even know how your body will react. I pressed my forehead against the door, frustration and fear twisting together. So you're just going to go through this alone? I asked, quieter now, on the other side. I heard a soft thud, like he had leaned back against the door too, mirroring me without meaning to. Better me than you, he said, and the certainty in his voice made something in my chest ache. I swallowed hard, fingers curling slightly against the wood. You think I'm that weak? I asked, almost a whisper. His answer came after a beat, slower now, steadier despite everything. I think you matter more. My breath caught. I slid down until I was sitting on the floor, my back against the door, knowing he was right there on the other side, separated by inches and something much harder to cross. Time blurred after that. The storm outside grew louder, the wind howling against the walls, but inside it was just us, and the door between us. I'm still here, I said at one point, my voice soft, just to fill the silence. I know, he answered, just as quietly. Hours passed like that, broken into fragments of breathing, of small words, of presence more than anything else. At some point I closed my eyes, not sleeping, just resting, still leaning against the door. You always protect me, I murmured, more to myself than to him, then added, barely audible, let me stay at least. There was no answer for a long moment. Then finally, don't leave, he said, and that was enough. When the first light started to seep through the windows, pale and cold, the distant sound of an engine broke through the quiet, faint at first, then closer. I pushed myself up just as the lock clicked from the inside. The door opened slowly. Griffin stood there, exhausted, pale, but still standing, still in control. I didn't hesitate, stepping forward and wrapping my arms around him, holding on. He stiffened for half a second, then his arms came around me, careful, controlled. I told you to stay away, he said, his voice hoarse. I pulled back just enough to look at him. I didn't come in, I replied. He exhaled, something like relief passing through his expression. Then he leaned his forehead lightly against mine, eyes closing for a brief second. You should have slept, he murmured. Couldn't, I said, and for the first time since the night began, the corner of his mouth lifted just slightly, tired but real. Of course you couldn't, he said, his hand coming up to rest gently at the back of my neck. Not pulling, not demanding, just there, steady. And for a moment, the storm outside, the distance, the fear, none of it mattered because we were still here, together. The medical team left with one last round of instructions, their voices calm but firm about rest and monitoring. I walked them out, then turned back to Griffin. You should still go, I said quietly. He shook his head, steady. I'm fine. Alpha physiology recovers fast. He stepped closer, brushing his fingers lightly against my cheek. Grounding, reassuring. I don't want to cut this short. I hesitated. But the way he looked at me, calm, certain, made it hard to argue. Just don't push yourself, I said finally. He gave a small nod. I won't. The day passed slower, softer, like everything had settled after the storm, and that night, I fell asleep. Earlier than usual, exhaustion finally catching up, wrapped in warmth and quiet, until, Evan, his voice came low and close, pulling me gently back. Hey, wake up. I frowned, barely opening my eyes. What time is it? Early, he said, already helping me sit up, careful, patient. Trust me, he added, holding out my coat. There was something in his tone that made me stop questioning. I let him help me into it, his hands lingering just a second longer at my shoulders, steady. Then he guided me. Outside, the cold hit instantly, sharp and clean. Waking me fully in a breath, I pulled my coat tighter, about to ask again when I looked up, and stopped. The sky above us wasn't just dark. It was alive. Vast ribbons of green light unfurled across the horizon, shifting, folding into themselves like silk caught in a slow current. Streaks of violet bled softly at the edges, deepening, fading, then returning again. The lights didn't stay still. They moved, breathing, rippling, stretching across the entire sky like something endless had decided to reveal itself all at once. Stars flickered faintly behind the glow, distant, almost swallowed by it. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The cold disappeared. Everything else disappeared. What? The word barely left my lips, my voice lost somewhere between awe and disbelief. Griffin stepped closer, not saying anything, just standing beside me, giving me space to take it in. His presence steady, warm against the cold air. I felt his hand find mine, fingers threading through mine, grounding me back into something real. I exhaled slowly, my chest tight in a way that didn't hurt, just too full. It's like, I tried, but the words didn't come. He let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh. Yeah, he said softly. We stood there like that, shoulder to shoulder, hands laced together, watching the sky shift and move above us, the lights dipping lower, then sweeping back up in long, fluid arcs, casting a faint glow over the snow, over us, everything, washed in soft green and violet. Time blurred, minutes or longer. I didn't know. I leaned into him without thinking, my head resting lightly against his shoulder. He adjusted just enough so it felt natural, his arm coming around me, not pulling, just holding, his chin brushing lightly against my hair. The world felt impossibly quiet, like it had paused just for this. I'm glad we stayed, I murmured, almost to myself. He didn't answer right away, just tightened his hold slightly. Me too, he said after a moment, his voice lower now, softer. I closed my eyes briefly, breathing in the cold air, the warmth beside me. Everything settling into something I didn't want to name in case it disappeared, and then I felt it. The shift, subtle but unmistakable, his arm loosening, his hand slipping from mine. I turned slightly, confused, just as he stepped in front of me. His expression different now, not distant, not guarded, but certain in a way that made my breath catch. Griffin, I started, but the words faded as he lowered himself down, one knee pressing into the snow without hesitation. The cold didn't matter. Nothing did in that moment. My heart stuttered, everything narrowing down to just him. Just this. The sky still moving behind him like something unreal framing something even more real. I wasn't planning to do it like this, he said, a quiet breath leaving him. But I'm not waiting anymore. My vision blurred slightly, tears gathering before I could stop them. After last night, he continued, his voice steady, grounded. I realized I don't want another day where I'm not sure you're staying. My chest tightened painfully, my hands trembling slightly at my sides. So don't ask me if I'm ready, he said, looking straight at me, unwavering. Ask yourself if you are. A tear slipped down, then another, my breath uneven. You always do this, I whispered, voice breaking, making it impossible to say no. The corner of his mouth lifted just slightly, softer than I'd ever seen it. Good, he said quietly. Because I don't want you to. He opened the small box, the ring catching the shifting glow from above, reflecting the green and violet light in brief flashes. Stay with me, he added, lower now, more certain than anything else, for real this time. A beat, then, Marry me. The words settled between us, simple, steady, undeniable. I nodded before I could even think, tears falling freely now. Yes, my voice barely held together, but it was real. Enough, more than enough. He stood, sliding the ring onto my finger with steady hands, then reached up, his palm resting lightly against my face, his forehead pressing against mine, close enough that I could feel his breath, warm against the cold night. Took you long enough, he murmured, and I let out a broken laugh through the tears, my hand gripping his sleeve, holding on. Above us, the sky kept moving, endless, alive, and for a moment, it felt like the whole world was breathing with us. The ocean stretched endlessly in front of us, the horizon blurred where the sky melted into water, sunlight scattering across the waves like liquid gold, the breeze soft but constant, carrying warmth and the faint scent of salt. Everything felt too bright, too open, like the world itself had decided to witness this moment with us. I stood barefoot on the sand, the grains warm beneath my feet, grounding and unreal at the same time. My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of my sleeve. Before I forced myself to relax, "Don't stand too long, the sand's hot." Griffin's mother's voice came gently from behind. Before I could even respond, a wide-brimmed hat was already placed lightly on my head, adjusted with careful hands like I might break if she wasn't paying attention. "And drink this," she added, pressing a cold bottle into my hand again. I let out a small, helpless laugh. "I just drank one." "Then drink another," she replied without missing a beat, completely serious. Griffin exhaled quietly beside me, leaning just enough that only I could hear him. "I told you," he murmured. "You're the favorite." I nudged him lightly, but the warmth in my chest spread too fast to hide, because he wasn't wrong. Ever since that day he brought me home after the proposal, they had never once treated me like an outsider, not even for a second. I remembered standing at that door, heart pounding, already preparing myself for polite distance, for quiet judgment, for the things I had learned to expect from the world. But the door had opened, and everything I thought I knew had quietly fallen apart. His mother had taken my hands before I even knew what to say, her grip warm, steady, like she had been waiting for me. His father had nodded once, then simply said, "You've had a long day, come sit." Like I already belonged there, like there was nothing to question, nothing to prove. And somewhere between that afternoon and the many days after, I stopped waiting for the moment things would change, because they never did. Even now, on this beach, his father stood a few steps away holding our baby, with the kind of focus usually reserved for something priceless, one hand supporting carefully, the other adjusting the blanket every few seconds as if the temperature might change at any moment. "He's fine," Griffin said, louder this time. But his father only glanced at him briefly, unimpressed. "You don't know that," he replied calmly, shifting the baby slightly. Griffin pressed his lips together, clearly deciding not to argue. "I couldn't help it," I laughed softly, shaking my head. "You see," Griffin muttered. "Not even my wedding day." "Our wedding day," I corrected quietly, and that was enough to make him look at me again. Really look, his expression softening just a fraction, grounding, steady. "Our wedding day," he repeated, lower this time, like it mattered more said that way. The ceremony began without any grand signal, just a quiet shift, a gentle gathering of attention, the sound of waves filling the spaces where music might have been. I stepped forward, and so did he, until we stood close enough that everything else faded. "You ready?" he asked softly. I nodded, my throat tight, but my voice steady enough. "Yeah." He took my hands, his grip firm, familiar, something I had come to rely on without realizing. "I choose you," he said, simple, direct, like always, no extra words, no hesitation, just truth. "Not because it's easy, not because it makes sense to anyone else, but because it's you." My chest tightened sharply, my eyes stinging before I could stop it. "I choose you too," I answered, softer, but no less certain. "Even when I still don't understand why you chose me." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, like he had heard that before and would keep hearing it for the rest of our lives. We exchanged rings, the metal warm against my skin, real, grounding, final in a way that didn't feel heavy, just right. His thumb brushed lightly against my knuckle as he slid it into place, a small, unconscious gesture that somehow meant more than anything else. Then he stepped closer, his hand lifting to my face, steady, gentle, And when he kissed me, it wasn't rushed, wasn't overwhelming. It was certain, like everything about him, like everything about us. And just as the moment settled into something quiet and full, wait, hold on. A voice broke in, half laughing, half panicked. I pulled back, blinking, turning just in time to see Griffin's father holding our baby a little further away than before, a visible damp patch spreading slowly across the front of his shirt. There was a beat of silence. Then laughter, real, unfiltered, warm. Griffin dragged a hand down his face, exhaling. Unbelievable, he muttered, already stepping forward to take the baby without hesitation, completely unfazed, like this was just another part of life now. Because it was, I laughed too, unable to stop, the kind of laughter that came from somewhere deep and light at the same time. His mother shook her head, smiling as she reached to fix the baby's blanket again like nothing had happened. Well, she said warmly, he chose the perfect moment. Griffin adjusted the baby easily in his arms, then looked back at me, one eyebrow lifting slightly. Still want a perfect wedding. I shook my head, smiling through the blur of tears still clinging to my vision. This is perfect, I said honestly, and it was messy, unpredictable, alive. Everything I never thought I would have. Later, when the sun dipped lower and the light softened into something golden and calm, when the laughter faded into quieter conversations, I stood there, watching it all, trying to take it in, and it still felt unreal, because not long ago, I had already decided what kind of ending I would get. I told everyone I was just a beta to avoid complications, to avoid being seen, to avoid disappointment. I planned a quiet, ordinary life, something safe, something small, and then he appeared. And everything shifted. I met his family and found a place I didn't know I was allowed to have. We signed our marriage papers quietly before the baby came, learned how to be parents in the middle of sleepless nights and small, overwhelming moments, and somehow, we made it here, not because everything was perfect, but because we stayed. Through all of it, I looked at Griffin, then at the baby in his arms, then at the people around us. And for the first time, I didn't question whether I deserved any of it, because maybe that had never been the point. Maybe you don't have to be perfect to deserve something perfect. Maybe all you have to do is not run away when it finally finds you.